There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in the middle of nowhere. It's not the absence of sound, but rather a heavy, suffocating presence that tells you that you are miles away from help. When you're driving down a stretch of highway that hasn't seen asphalt repair since the 70s, the darkness outside your windows feels physical. Tonight, we are exploring the accounts of those who ventured into the void, the places where cell service dies, and the only light comes from your own flickering headlights. These are stories for the restless, for those who find comfort in the unsettling. Welcome to the edge of the world, where the monsters aren't always in your head.
Our first story comes from a long-haul trucker named Elias. 2 years ago, Elias was crossing the Nebraska plains at 2 a.m. The road was a straight line into infinity, flanked by endless cornfields that seemed to swallow the light. About 50 miles from the nearest town, his high beams caught something unusual, an old, rusted pickup truck parked sideways across both lanes. Elias slowed down, his heart hammering against his ribs. There was no one in the driver's seat, but as he pulled to a stop, he saw a figure standing in the tall stalks of corn just 5 feet from his door. The person wasn't moving. They were just standing there, wearing a yellow raincoat, staring directly at the cabin of his truck with a wide, unnatural grin.
Elias didn't wait to see if the figure needed help. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to move. He threw the semi into reverse, the engine roaring in the dead air. As he swung the massive vehicle around, his headlights swept across the cornfield, revealing not one, but dozens of figures in yellow raincoats, all standing perfectly still, all spaced exactly 10 feet apart. They weren't holding weapons, they were just watching. He floored it, the tires screaming on the pavement. In his rearview mirror, he saw the rusted pickup truck's lights suddenly flicker to life. It didn't follow him at a normal speed. It stayed exactly 100 yards behind him for the next 30 miles, never gaining, never falling back, until the first streetlights of a gas station appeared on the horizon.
Then there is the story of Sarah and Mark, who rented a secluded cabin in the Appalachian Mountains for their anniversary. The cabin was advertised as off the grid, a phrase they would later come to loathe. By the second night, the charm of the isolation had vanished. It started with the scratching. Not the sound of a squirrel or a raccoon, but a slow, rhythmic dragging of fingernails against the exterior cedar planks. Sarah woke up at 3:15 a.m. to find Mark standing by the window, his face pale. He whispered that he had seen someone standing by the tree line, holding a long wooden pole with something silver tied to the top. When they checked the perimeter the next morning, they found no footprints, but every single window of the cabin had been marked with a small red X in what looked like dried clay.
Determined to leave, they packed their bags, but when they reached their car, they found all 4 tires slashed with surgical precision. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away through dense, uphill terrain. With no cell service, they had no choice but to hike. As they walked the narrow trail, the feeling of being watched became an overwhelming pressure. Sarah kept hearing a low whistling sound, a melody that felt ancient and wrong. Every time they turned around, they caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of a gray cloak disappearing behind a trunk. The sun began to set much faster than they anticipated, and the woods transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. That's when the whistling stopped, and the heavy, wet sound of something running on all 4s began behind them. They eventually made it to the main road just as a local sheriff's deputy was passing by. When they told their story, the deputy's face went cold. He didn't ask for descriptions or look for suspects. He simply told them to get in the car and drove them 40 miles to the city. He told them that they weren't the first couple to leave that cabin in a panic, but they were the first ones to make it to the road before dark. He mentioned an old legend about the Hollow Men, beings that don't want your money or your life, but simply want to play a game of pursuit until your heart gives out from the sheer terror. To this day, Sarah cannot listen to anyone whistle without trembling.
In the middle of the Mojave Desert, there is a gas station that doesn't appear on any modern GPS. It's a relic of the 50s, with rusted pumps and a neon sign that hums with a low, vibrating frequency. A solo traveler named David stumbled upon it when his fuel light came on.
The attendant was an old man with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes that seemed to be clouded over with cataracts. He didn't speak, he just pointed to the pump. As David filled his tank, he noticed a door leading to a basement behind the station. The door was cracked open, and from the darkness below he heard the sound of a child laughing. Not a happy laugh, but a repetitive, mechanical sound, like a recording on a loop. Curiosity, or perhaps a lack of judgment, led David to peek inside. The stairs were rotted, and the air smelled of ozone and wet copper. At the bottom of the stairs, in a room lit by a single bare bulb, were dozens of old television sets piled on top of one another. Every single screen was showing the same thing, a live feed of David himself, standing at the pump just minutes ago. Then the screens changed. They showed David standing at the basement door. Then they showed David looking into the room. The last screen, the one in the center, showed David from behind. He realized with a jolt of pure ice that the camera for that shot had to be right behind him in the doorway. He didn't turn around. He ran.
He jumped into his car and pushed the engine to its limit. He didn't look back until he was 20 miles away. When he finally worked up the courage to check his rearview mirror, the desert was empty. But when he reached his destination and looked at his credit card statement the next day, there was no charge for the gas. In fact, there was no record of him being in that part of the desert at all. He went back a week later with a friend to find the station, but there was nothing there but a patch of scorched earth and a single broken television tube half buried in the sand. Some places in the middle of nowhere don't exist in our world. They just wait for someone to wander into theirs.
Our final account comes from a hiker who found an abandoned town in the Pacific Northwest. This wasn't a ghost town from the gold rush, but a modern suburb that had been reclaimed by the moss and the trees. Houses stood with their doors wide open, dinner plates still on the tables, and cars parked in driveways with the keys still in the ignition. It was as if everyone had simply stood up and walked into the forest at the exact same moment. As the hiker explored, he found a community center. Inside, on a massive chalkboard, someone had written the same sentence over and over again until the chalk was worn down to a nub. "The trees are calling, and I must answer."
The hiker felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to keep walking into the woods. He said it felt like a soft hum in the back of his skull, a vibrating note that made his feet move without his permission. He managed to break the trance only when he tripped over a fallen branch and sliced his hand open. The pain snapped him back to reality. He ran back the way he came, never looking back at the empty houses or the silent streets. He says that even now, years later, when he stands near a forest, he can still hear that hum, calling him back to the town that shouldn't exist. The middle of nowhere is a hungry place, and it never truly lets go of what it finds.
Sleep well tonight, and remember, if you find yourself on a lonely road or a silent trail, don't stop for the shadows. The middle of nowhere is only empty until you arrive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates and true horror stories. Until next time, stay safe in the dark.